It's an issue that we've been covering for several weeks, and this has just got to drive people crazy. Squatters staking claim to property they don't own, and landlords in the city say they can't get rid of these people.
That's because New York's recent anti-squatting laws aren't doing much to solve the problem. And since the cost to live here gets higher month by month, experts say the problem of people squatting in apartments they don't plan on paying for is only gonna keep growing.
A rally at New York City Hall calling for new laws to prevent squatters from taking over homes that don't belong to them.
Residents on this University Heights block believe recent asylum seekers tore it apart. Detectives say a group of migrants had been squatting inside vacant apartments here.
My tenants only pay me 1 month's rent. They know the game. They know after 30 days, you cannot evict them.
You can see here, this door's been broken into several times. You can smell, it smells like cigarettes. When we came in to clean it, there were cigarette butts all over the floor.
He says a tenant has refused to pay rent for more than 7 years.
I have to pay all the usual building expenses. I have to pay my attorney.
So we started the holdover case. We gave her a 90 days notice to move out. She completely stopped paying rent, so we haven't received rent in a full year.
To me, this is like a hotel. Everyone had individual mini fridges in their room, space heaters.
But it wasn't a hotel, it was your home.
Right.
These landlords say their expenses mount as others take advantage of a situation that allows them to live rent-free.
New York has a new plan to start tracking and monitoring its growing squatter population. But what nobody's talking about is that this isn't going to change the law that makes squatting legal here in the first place. Instead, it's just going to put the addresses of apartments that have been stolen by squatters in an internet-connected database. And this isn't going to do anything to stop the financial bleeding experienced by aggrieved homeowners across the city, who are laws forced to maintain their properties while squatters reside in them 100% rent-free, while sometimes using them as hideouts for illegal activity and gang-related activity. Which should surprise no one, because the anti-squatting law that was passed a month ago was never meant to solve a problem that's been going on here for years. Which is why the problem of squatters in this city is only getting worse. But wait, there's more. Because New York is in the middle of a growing housing crisis with only 1.4% of apartments available to be rented. Families all over the city are struggling with surging rents, while at the same time landlords are struggling with soaring costs to maintain their rundown properties before they fall down. Which means the squatting problem will naturally grow as a byproduct of New York's lack of affordable housing. But the reason it's gonna grow even faster than it normally would is because New York's recent laws only restricted one type of squatting, and it's the second type that is virtually impossible to stop and is now becoming much more popular. Oh wow. So as you can see here, we have an empty apartment, and because it's empty, it's a magnet for squatters. This place has never had a squatter, but other poorly managed buildings have, and it's a problem.
Residents on this University Heights block believe recent asylum seekers tore it apart. Detectives say a group of migrants had been squatting inside vacant apartments here.
Coming in on motorcycles and mopeds and, creating havoc.
Detectives say.
So what you have here is a very sad situation, but it perfectly symbolizes the urban decay taking place in this city. And although it was asylum seekers involved in this particular incident, thugs break into empty apartments all the time and take them over. By the way, this place, $46.95 a month, and it's even got laundry and 3 floors. But the landlord here cares about the property in the building, so he's always watching. Which apparently wasn't the case at this property on the news, because squatters had taken over several apartments in the building. And it's perfectly legal in New York for people who know how to work the system. And this happens a lot in buildings where the landlords don't have the money to renovate the apartments or pay people to check up on them. And what's so maddening about this is 30 days ago, New York City passed an anti-squatting law that everyone was so proud of. But all it did was amend the current rules to say that squatters aren't tenants, but it failed to define when a squatter becomes a tenant. And it's also up to the police to arrive at the scene of a squatting incident and decide if the person is there legitimately. And let's face it, the police have so much going on in this city, they're not gonna kick people out of apartments they claim to live in and face the protests and repercussions of that. But as you're about to see, the problem of squatting is growing at such an alarming rate that the city not only is unable to keep on top of all of these issues, they don't even know how many times it's happening they get so many complaints.
They are not tenants, they are squatters.
Councilmember Susan Zhuang, along with more than a dozen co-sponsors, are hoping to change that. They filed a bill that's gaining support that would require police, 911, and other city agencies to record and track squatter calls.
It is unacceptable.
So when you have a system that rewards lawless behavior, how can you expect it not to grow and not to cost landlords thousands of dollars trying to get rid of people who aren't paying rent, which they have to do because squatting related matters get sent over to housing court, not to criminal court, which makes them a civil matter. This would be the ultimate home office. No windows, no distractions, just you and your work. But while this new potential rule change isn't going to do anything to fix the squatting problem and might make it worse by avoiding any real action that might actually get rid of bad people who have stolen an apartment, perhaps it'll bring awareness to the squatting problem in this city, which is just getting completely out of hand.
It is unacceptable that homeowners have to spend thousands of dollars going into court to protect what is rightfully theirs, which is their own home, their own property.
After a series of 7-year cited.
So, while most people think of their landlord as being super rich because they own the building and you or I have to rent it from them, there are a lot of middle-income landlords who have a couple of properties and managing and running them and collecting the rent is their full-time job. They provide a valuable service, which is places for people to live. And wait till you hear how one-sided this city is when it comes to landlord-tenant disputes. This has to go to housing court. And guess who gets a free attorney when you go to housing court? The squatter. Meanwhile, the owner is stuck paying for all of the bills to defend himself in court and try to reclaim his apartment. He's also got to pay for all of the bills regarding the apartment. Like, for example, the heat for the apartment. This and hot water are required for apartments like this one, and if the landlord were to shut those off, the squatter could sue them. And to make matters worse, residents of that squatted Bronx apartment that made the news, they told reporters that the squatters were terrorizing everybody else in the entire building, lowering the landlord's ability to make money off apartments that people wanted to live in and wanted to pay the rent for. It just, squatting destroys everything. This apartment is in Soho, by the way, not the Bronx. And although $4,600 a month rent for this part of town is reasonable, how many people are gonna live next to somebody who pays $0 and destroys the building and wanna keep sending in their rent checks? Do you see what a problem this is? People pay thousands of dollars to live somewhere because the entire experience from the neighborhood to the apartment to the building are pleasant experiences. But sadly, the reason squatting keeps happening is because of one loophole that our lawmakers do not want to close.
Now a Staten Island senator is hoping to take it one step further. She filed a bill that would give tenants rights after 60 days instead of 30 to make it more difficult for trespassers to stay. And the bill would also allow prosecutors to charge squatters with criminal trespassing.
We want to just add this enhancement.
Did you hear that? You are automatically a tenant in this city if you've lived somewhere for 30 days, even with no paperwork or without paying any rent. Which means we've got a law here that makes you automatically a tenant, but doesn't make you automatically a squatter. And the real reason this is a problem isn't just because squatters have rights. No, it's the delay between someone who's a squatter being taken to housing court and the 6 to 8 months to a year later where the housing court finally gets around to addressing the problem. And as you're about to see, this isn't just a problem that costs landlords money. Oh no, it's actually costing all of us money, even if we're not squatters, even if we pay our rent on time, and none of us have any idea this is going on. So what most people don't know is that the reason many New York apartments are as small and as gross and as claustrophobic as they are is because squatters are stealing from the people that are supposed to make them better.
Diana owns an 8-unit building in Park Slope. He says a tenant who was supposed to be a caretaker for an elderly resident has refused to pay rent for more than 7 years.
I have to pay all the usual building expenses. I have to pay my attorney, and it also becomes very difficult.
Did you hear that? 7 years. That's insane. The laws here do nothing but protect perpetual criminals. And even though this particular building might be worth millions on paper, the only way it's possible for the entryway to look like something out of a horror movie is because it also costs millions of dollars to operate. And what that means is in a perfect world, this, being a landlord, is not a get-rich-quick scheme. If anything, it'll make you a moderate level of money if you're a small-time owner. And that's only if all of the units you have access to pay their rent on time, which in the example we just covered isn't happening. That building's only got 8 units. And if one of those 8 units doesn't pay any rent for 7 years. And if all the units in the building are the same size, it means that over the last 8 years, the entire building missed out on 1 full year of rent. Which is absolute madness in a city that's already got a housing crisis, because what most people don't know is that anti-landlord laws are actually anti-housing laws. Now, that doesn't mean tenants shouldn't have rights and be protected from bad apples that just want to take advantage of people and screw them over, but it does mean there's got to be at least some balance between protecting people and eliminating the source of housing we need. Because if New York keeps making it its mission to pass laws that torture and bankrupt its landlords, it shouldn't be surprised when they give up and stop providing housing.
It's become a lengthy battle that's drawn out in housing court. Madalena Wooding, who owns this property on 4th Avenue, is dealing with a similar situation.
So we started the holdover case. We gave her a 90 days notice to move out. This was in June of last year, 23. And as soon as she was served that, she completely stopped paying rent, so we haven't received rent.
That's the problem, isn't it? The city's laws allow you to live rent-free in any apartment you want, if you want, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And this is how squatting happens most of the time, even in beautiful luxury apartments. Here, you don't have gang members taking over places and then refusing to move out. No, you have white-collar criminals doing the exact same thing. They've got a good job, they move in, they pay rent for 1 month, and then they just stop for some reason. Probably because their Land Rover will get repossessed if they don't make the payments on it, yet the apartment they live in won't get repossessed if they stop making payments for that. That's what happens when you make owning something a human right. People no longer have to pay for it because they're rightfully entitled to it, unlike this Land Rover. And since every New York City law targeting squatters is made in that context, since housing's always a human right, squatters will always exist. And if you want proof that this just keeps getting worse, there have been over 500,000 evictions filed in New York City. That's over 100,000 evictions every single year for the last 5 years. There's no way a court that is supposed to give people justice, quick, swift justice, can keep up with that kind of nonsense. It certainly doesn't help that while a housing court case is pending, squatters can still live in the apartment without paying anything, and when landlords eventually get their property back, the judge doesn't typically award any kind of damages. The main damage of which is back rent. Landlords never get that, even if the tenant didn't pay for several years. At best, they will be granted merciful repossession of their hollowed out, destroyed dwelling place by the judge, who's probably a renter and who probably doesn't like landlords too much. This is also pretty common in instances where the apartment that the person lives in gets totally destroyed. Maybe they throw lots of parties, maybe they build a fish tank into the wall, maybe they flood the whole place because they don't know how to use their dishwasher and they just destroy the floors. Well, landlords typically don't ever get people to pay restitution for stuff like that. Worst case, they'll lose 1 month of security deposit, but they weren't paying rent anyways, so who cares? But the only reason we're talking about new anti-squatting measures is because the city got rid of the previous ones, probably because they were so simple and so effective that landlords were able to eliminate squatters before giving them the keys. And these rollbacks have caused untold amounts of destruction.
Councilmember Susan Swong introduced a new bill that would require the police department, HPD, and other city agencies to make squatting data public information. It's the first.
You know what's the most maddening thing about this new idea? It's that it's just going to record when and where squatting happens. But we already had a system like that, but now landlords are forbidden from looking at whether or not you've been to housing court before deciding to rent to you. Back in 2019, lawmakers figured out they could get everybody all riled up by claiming that housing court records were effectively an anti-tenant blacklist. Which isn't true, but that doesn't matter. Landlords are now banned from going on the housing court records to see if Jane Smith ever sued their prior landlord and looking up exactly what happened to see if Jane Smith is going to sue them. And we just looked at statistics of how evictions have surged over the last 5 years since this law was passed, which likely means landlords are accepting more scammers and squatters without even realizing it. But that brings up a big question. Why is this being allowed to happen? Why are we letting squatters get away with this? And there's zero effort being made to educate the general public as to how a profitable housing economy, which protects both landlords and renters at the same time, is going to be good for everybody. But what about the argument that it's wrong to make money off something that is a human right? Well, let's talk about that, because even though all of the buildings around here might look really small and really old and really terrible, we also in New York have the largest city-funded public housing project ever, NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority. And our housing projects are consistently among the city's worst landlords, yet they are owned and operated by the city, and they're not supposed to make profit. Yet corruption in our city-run housing projects is off the charts. A whole bunch of officials were just busted for bribery, and they were caught offering lucrative construction jobs to the same handful of contractors who were paying them under the table. The workers, they were the ones getting bribes. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, now that the bad guys have been arrested, tested, surely everything's fine, but no, look at this. It actually takes NYCHA over 400 days to renovate an apartment, which is why they've got 5,000 affordable units nobody can live in. And look, NYCHA's a government agency. What is the incentive for them to work any faster than the people at the motor vehicles department? No hate, you guys have a tough job, you deal with a lot of nasty people, but you understand what I'm saying. If the motivation to do something quickly isn't profit, then what is it? Because being a landlord is a business and providing housing is a service. You're supposed to be competitive. You're supposed to try and do your best to beat out the rest of the market and get the customer's business. But public housing does away with all of those incentives. They simply just don't exist. No one's working quickly on anything. In fact, that little apartment we saw earlier that was all brand new, that happened in way less than 400 days. In fact, it happened in about 60 days. And the big holdup in getting it finished was waiting for the government to come along and issue the requisite permits like certificate of occupancy. And that's because even if the landlord of a building like that isn't exactly as kind to you as Santa Claus or your mother, they can start collecting their $4,600 a month rent the sooner they finish that place. But that brings us to the real problem with New York City housing. That's a lot of money. Most people can't afford something like that. But the reason it's a lot of money is because we aren't exactly passing laws to help people become landlords or to help the landlords we do have build new properties. And if you've ever wondered why New York City is full of super old buildings that just won't seem to go away, it's because they can't. If this building vanishes, it has to be replaced by the exact same thing. Well, technically you could replace it with something else, but the city has so many laws regarding what things need to be like, historic preservation laws as they're also called, that what you see all around us right now is what you get. Making the idea of becoming a landlord or having your children inherit your buildings and take over is an idea that very few landlords are excited about. And by disincentivizing the ownership and operation of a housing-based business, squatters might win, which I guess is great because they vote, but the rest of us lose. Is that what's happening in New York? How would you fix our squatting problem and help New York get out of its housing crisis? Let me know. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.